This is Bill Ratner, also known as Flint from the G.I. Joe TV cartoon. And you're listening to Jeff Haas on the Traversing the Stars podcast.
Hi, Mr. Ratner. Thank you so much for coming to Divergent Stars podcast.
All right, Jeff, how exciting.
Oh, it's really exciting for me. I grew up on G.I. Joe, so this is a really big deal for me. Thank you so much for doing it.
So, how old were you when you started watching?
I was born in 1980, so G.I. Joe came out, I think, 85, 86, so about 5 or 6 years old. Uh,
Really? Now, was it on once a week or every day? Because it sort of changed over the
yeah,
years.
I can't quite recall. All I remember is that I remember the show, and I had all the toys. My father would buy me all the G.I. Joe toys, so I had my Flint. I had all my major toys. My very first one ever was a Baroness G.I. Joe toy and Roadblock.
Cool.
But yeah, I played with them for years. I still have many of them in the house now from my childhood. So they were one of the most seminal toys growing up for me.
Excellent. Great.
So for you, what inspired your love for acting, and who are your earliest influences?
I watched a lot of TV as a kid, and this was in the early 50s. I'd wake up and my parents would be still in bed on a Saturday morning. I'd sneak down to the basement and turn on Captain Kangaroo, who was a television executive named Bob Keeshan on CBS. And I just didn't like Captain Kangaroo. Hey kids, everything was very happy and very sweet. I loved Mighty Mouse, and cartoons technically were very crude back then. Walt Disney, of course, was doing amazing things in cinema,
Hmm.
but on television, before the Mickey Mouse Club and before Disney produced for TV itself, um, you can actually go on YouTube and see Clutch Cargo, where it's essentially an animated still moving left to right, with the only thing moving on the screen is the mouths. And one of the reasons that GI Joe and Transformers, which came out at the same time, both from Sunbow, both from Hasbro, um, one of the reasons that they were so successful is the animators and the production companies really changed the way American television cartoons looked,
Hmm.
and they needed the help of the anime industry in Japan. There was actually a very sort of dangerous, near tragic incident um, involving the production company in Hollywood receiving a crate of celluloid cells and in betweening and shots that required panning, zooming, or tilting. These are film terms
Right.
uh, that the Japanese studios did for both Transformers and GI Joe TV cartoons. But at the time, before this is this is 40 years before 40. This is literally when we produced it about 41 years ago, certainly before the internet was in action for production companies. Um, they shipped crates from
Hmm.
Tokyo to Los Angeles, and I believe it was January, February is the winter time, and a number of animators and anybody who touched the cells that were in the crate from Tokyo came down with a terrible flu. And the and more than half the animators were out of work and at home for a week, and just coughing and sneezing, and finally somebody put two and two together and called the studio in Tokyo and said, "Any chance anybody come down with a few?" And they said, "Oh yeah, the flu. Oh yeah, the whole studio." And so literally, you've heard the term Asian flu, which is a variety of influenza. Every year there are many varieties of flu that are put into the flu shots that are given and so on. And so this was a case of where Hollywood technically was reliant on the anime industry for, again, any shots required panning left to right or right to left,
Hmm.
tilting up or down, and zooming had to be done in Tokyo. Needless to say, in the late 80s, the Americans adopted the technology and were able to do it themselves. But
Hmm.
G.I. Joe and Transformers were the only TV cartoons that employed really sophisticated anime techniques,
Hmm.
and thus, and not only that, but realistic acting. Wally Burr was ran a studio in Studio City near Universal, and he was our director for both the Transformers and the GI Joe sessions, voiceover sessions with all the actors. And the average session over at Hanna-Barbera and Warner Brothers and Disney for their TV cartoons would last, 60 to 90 minutes.
Mm.
Wally kept us for 4.5 hours because it'd be, listen, guys, I was the youngest tank commander in World War II, and I know how those guys talk. They don't talk like cartoon actors. Let's get real. Take 14. And so we were really required to be better, to
Mm.
do realistic, naturalistic acting. And the first time I encountered an image of Flint, he looked nothing like me. I mean, he was this, big pectoral muscles and a black beret, and the operator, warrant officer, a special forces guy. And I thought, well, what does he sound like? I'm going to have to do something. And bunches of us, literally dozens of us, are standing in line outside Welliver's studio on a nice sunny day in California. And next, one by one, we go into the dark studio and stand in front of the microphone. And Wally Burr and a bunch of Hasbro and Sunbow executives are on the other side of the glass. All right, Flint, take one. All right, Lady Jaye. I believe the space monster is outside the door, and we gotta get out of here. Yo, Joe. And Wally Burr comes on the talk back and says, Bill, give it some energy, for goodness sake. I mean, come on, man. You're fighting a space monster. There was an episode where, where it was like a really evil version of E.T. versus Flint. And I had to sound like I was about to be killed. But for all of those reasons, their demand for decent naturalistic acting and the animation, which really was steps up from what was
Mm.
shown on TV before, made them, for the time, incredible cartoons.
Now, I think one of the great things about G.I. Joe is that it also had such a massive cast. I know nowadays everyone records separately, usually in their own studios or on Zoom. Back when you were doing G.I. Joe, were you all in the same studio together?
Yes, which really made it, I think, a much better show than it would have been had we been brought in like voice actors are today for games. It's
Hmm.
one at a time. You're asked to, okay, pretend you're outside in a storm. Okay, say the same line. You're in the bathroom. Okay, say the same line. You're going down the steps in a castle, and because they record the voice before they do any of the animation in the
Hmm.
games. Um, but the first day there were 8 of us lined up at microphones, and the only technical direction they gave was, please don't overlap your dialogue. In other words, if actor A were saying, "What are you talking about?" and actor B says, "You know what I'm talking about," um, to give a second and a half pause.
Hmm.
But when you have actors in a room together, it allows them to be much more realistic in their dialogue. And there was a lot of dialogue. I mean, the relationship between Flint and Lady Jaye and Duke and Scarlet and on and on and on was really, these relationships were essential, and to get some kind of reality in the dialogue, what was made much more possible, as and was allowed by what you just asked about. Were we in the room at the same time? Absolutely. And sometimes 4 of us, sometimes 6 of us, sometimes 8 of us, depending on the script. And you're mentioning the characters is interesting because G.I. Joe, as you know, was originally a character named G.I. Joe.
Hmm.
And I remember my dad giving me a G.I. Joe comic book in the early 50s. And on the cover, he was this angry looking guy with big muscular jaws, and he had a semi automatic weapon. And I think this was uh, certainly the comic books were sold during the Korean War in the early 50s. And I believe G.I. Joe was also a character during World War II. Hasbro had the dolls up through the 70s, and I call them dolls because they're the size of Barbie. They're not, they were, about 11 and a half inches tall, G.I. Joe was.
Hmm.
And uh, the Vietnam War, which wound down in the early to mid 70s, um, actually had a negative effect on the sales of G.I. Joe, the action figure from
Mm.
Hasbro. And Hasbro gave up G.I. Joe right around the time that Nixon sort of, in the Vietnamese end of the war. Americans had gotten tired of sending their sons and daughters to Vietnam. Um, and then when George Lucas had such an incredible success, not only with Star Wars the movie, but Star Wars the action figures, and made probably three times the money off of selling toys and action figures than selling tickets to the movies. Um, those figures were 3.5 inches tall and were cheaper to make, and were made in China, mass production. And so the Hasbro people in Providence, Rhode Island, their headquarters said, gee, can we bring back G.I. Joe? And I'd love to have been a fly on the wall to hear the
Mm.
executives arguing, no, no, for goodness sake, I got to bring back G.I. Joe. I mean, he tanked in 1974. Well, how about the Joe team? Someone said brilliantly. What do you mean? And it was a very small team of us. I think only about six characters.
Mm.
Destro, Cobra Commander, Duke, Scarlet, Flint, Lady Jaye, and some extras who were in the mini series that was produced first
Mm.
to test market whether or not the TV cartoon could make any money for anybody. The networks didn't want it. CBS, Fox, NBC, CBS, ABC. And so the Hasbro people and the Sunbow people had to go literally door to door from TV group to TV group. And TV groups can be anywhere from, a small town guy in Mississippi who owns six local TV stations to 12, ABC affiliates in larger markets. So they had to go station for station, group to group. And they were able to sell, I think we did 6 episodes of the miniseries. And I'm assuming it showed on Saturday mornings in about 1984 and did very well. And thus they were able to sell 13 more episodes of featuring the Joe team. And bit by bloody bit, they brought on more and more characters,
Mm.
Cobra characters, more Joe team characters, until the end of 2 years. Um, I think there are about 85 characters altogether,
Mm.
which, and I remember being at a kids camp where my daughters went, and I taught a media class to get a break on tuition, and all these kids knew about GI Joe, and both boys and girls, because there were strong female figures. And I said, okay, you guys, and this was in the '80s. How much money would your parents have to pay to buy you only one of each of the action figures and the vehicles? And we really tried to think about it, and they, took out their little calculators, and we figured it was about $1,600. Today's prices, it'd be more like $2,800.
Mm.
Um, but with 85 action figures, and I don't know how many vehicles, GI Joe was just a bonanza for Hasbro, and it was also a bonanza for the actors. I mean, it was a union gig, and we got residuals for years, and those of us, our voices were recognized, and I got work out of it. I
Mm.
mean, I got work on the Discovery Channel at an audition, somebody saying, wait a minute, your voice is kind of familiar. You're not on G.I. Joe, are you? I played Flint. Oh man. So I ended up getting gigs from Discovery and MTV. And so it was good for everybody. It was fun. It was really fun. And
One thing that I'm from Warwick, Rhode Island, so one of the things we're very proud of is Hasbro is only a couple of cities over from us. So Hasbro is a very important aspect of where I live. So
yeah,
that's very incredible. And I think one of the cool things you mentioned 85 characters. I probably had like my father would buy me. I think I got to like 40 something of those figures. And like I said, I just remember each, you would memorize the names and you would have that card that came on the back of your toy
I
packet with all the descriptions of the characters on it. And I remember just like reading through it, remember making sure I knew who the ranks were and what they could do and all this other stuff. It was incredible just how much of a childhood was based on the enjoyment of G.I. Joe.
you know I had a really interesting experience. Hasbro used to put on GI Joe Con. They may be bringing it back. They did it for a number of years. Partly because of the movies, and they could sell action figures and so on, and then ended up being too expensive to do. But Mary McDonald Lewis, who played Lady Jaye, and I think Michael Bell, who played Duke, and B.J. Ward, who played Scarlet, and there are a few others, were invited to attend the conference. And one of our jobs was to have supper with fans. And so I was at a table with a guy in his early 30s who knew a lot about G.I. Joe and collected all the action figures and was one of the organizers of the event. And his parents were there. And I turned to his parents and kind of snarky, I said, "So how do you feel about your 30-year-old son still playing with G.I. Joe action figures?" And she said, "Well, he and I are both school teachers in the Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania public school system." And she said, "I teach inner city kids, and the literacy level is low in my eighth grade class. And I asked the principal permission to borrow my son's VHS tapes of G.I. Joe episodes, later came out, of course, on
Hmm.
DVDs, and his action figures and his comic books." And the principal said, "Fine, whatever you can do." And so she did a 6-month GI Joe program for these kids, and they couldn't believe it. They were able to watch cartoons, and then she passed out the comic books and passed out the action figures and had them write their own sort of fan fiction versions of GI Joe
Hmm.
scenarios. And apparently, according to testing, she said within a year, she had raised the literacy level 50% in her class
Wow.
of eighth graders. And when I heard this, I went, "Yo, Joe,"
That is
I mean,
awesome.
and I remember there was at one of the conferences I met the marketing director for Hasbro, who helped market and sell all the action figures and the DVDs and everything else. Um, and I said, "Gee, these days with gamers, they must be making billions off action figures." And he said, "Absolutely not." He said, most of the games have discontinued their action figures." I said, "Why?" And he said, "Because these kids, they're gaming all the time. They're not playing with action figures." And I thought, how interesting. And Barbie is an example where I did a paper on Barbie and interviewed and did some articles on Barbie and GI Joe, and actually did a program in the Hollywood Fringe Theater Festival called "The True Life Adventures of Barbie and
Hmm.
GI Joe," and found out that as far as women were concerned in Barbie, 50% of them felt, well, this is gender stereotyping and blah 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 blah. But 50% interviewed of thousands of women said, "Oh, this is the most creative experience I've ever had.
Hmm.
I'm a Hollywood script writer. I never would have become a writer had it not been for me and my girlfriends burning Barbie's hair and dumping her in the trash and having her do kung fu against Ken and on and on and on." And so kids who are playing like yourself and like myself with earlier with Korean War action figures,
Hmm.
in the act of playing with toys, and you're making up dialogue, you're using your imagination, you're mocking it up, you're writing scenarios, you're
Hmm.
improvising theater, the theater of the theater. Instead of World War II, it's GI Joe or Transformers. And so I just found all that kind of interesting, and it made me nostalgic, not only for
Hmm.
my childhood, but for the days of Transformers and GI Joe, when kids were actually making stuff up and inventing with their toys.
Well, one of the great things about GI Joe, I mean, we're currently living in the 21st century where inclusivity is very important. But GI Joe was an early example of inclusivity in their characters. They had characters for almost every group of people. Some of it might have been on a little more on stereotypical side on some level, but the fact that they were there and in front of you, to me, was an extremely important idea. And I think GI Joe should get more credit for being ahead of its time by 30 something years and doing that with their characters.
Yeah. Um, I think they did it for two reasons. One, they felt it was only fair to have Asian characters, to have females characters who were strong, African American characters, Native American characters, on and on. Um, Secondly, they were able to sell more action figures. I don't want to be cynical about it, but it did have an effect. There were there are always women who come up to us at the various Comic Cons and so on when we're signing autographs, uh, who say thank you for not making me play with Barbie and for letting me play with GI Joe toys. And I'm just trying to Storm Shadow.
Hmm.
Here was Lee Byung-hun voices Thomas Arasakage, known as Storm Shadow in the film, and but in the TV show, there was um, Ryoichi Tanaka was one of the voice actors. Um, well, actually, no, it was one of the characters. Hochu Otsuka, Yosuka Kayara, Masayuki Omoro, um, the female Mami Koyama, um, and so every recording session was very interesting. We'd meet more and more people, and men, women, African Americans, Asians, Native Americans, etc., all because of the writers. And Hasbro said, "Oh, okay, whatever." Um, so we can really thank the writers and the creators of the series of GI Joe for doing that.
So one thing about having a cast that size, when you watch the episodes, quite often not every character can appear in every episode. Even the Duke got overshadowed later on by having more episodes with Flint, things of that nature. Was there any ever an issue with screen or voice screen time, as it were, with your characters, where you want to make sure your character in competition, making sure your character has more time than other characters as the show went on? I mean, even Snake Eyes, who had no voice, took up a lot of screen time. So was there ever that kind of sense of competition among the cast?
I think that's more of something in film or television, especially soap opera.
Hmm.
We have a friend whose son is popular soap opera actor, and he talks about that, where the same cast members show up day after day, for literally 5 days a week, year after year, and one character will be favored by the writers as more interesting, or be given a more important story arc than another. For us, we didn't really have any idea what was going on from the beginning. When my agent called me about 3 weeks later and said, "You got the job as Flint," and I said, "What is Flint?" It's the GI Joe thing. I said, what is it?" We didn't even know what we were really auditioning for. Okay, it's a miniseries. It's only 6 episodes, and we were happy to have the work.
Hmm.
Then suddenly it was 13 more episodes. And then it was 13 more episodes. Then it was 13 more episodes. And there was a core of us who were the central figures. Cobra, Commander, Destro, Duke, Scarlet, Flint, Lady Jaye, and a good handful of others. And then there was a much larger group of characters that were recurring but not main characters. They may very well have recorded them separately. We didn't stand there with 50 other actors recording. So
Hmm.
I think they scheduled us throughout the day. So there was never really an opportunity to go, "Well, wait a minute, how come he has more lines than me?"
Right.
And it was done in bits and fits and starts, portions of a script here, portions of a script there. Um, I felt just so ridiculously lucky, and I feel lucky to this day that I can go and have reunions with old buddies who are on
Hmm.
the show and meet fans and sign autographs and have somebody shove some cash in my hand. I mean, what's wrong with that?
Hmm.
Um, so, but that's me, and I'm sure the other principals felt the same way. Um, I think the folks who played characters that had fewer episodes just felt lucky that all voice actors, every time you get hired, you feel lucky. You're a freelancer. You're going from gig to gig. And whereas on Days of Our Lives, the soap operas, it's a regular gig. You have a
Hmm.
year-long contract, and you have enough time to get to get bitter in your trailer, going, "How come? why does that guy get so many lines and I get nothing? But so that's an interesting question. But I think that voice actors in particular, because the jobs come and go so fast,
Hmm.
you don't have time. Your head is just spinning day to day, going, "Oh, you mean I get to play a pinata for Disney? Oh, wow, great! How long is that going to last? An hour and a half. Then my next gig is to do a promo for the Dog Channel tonight on the Dog Channel. Gee, I just made $250. Wow, what's so
Now,
that's kind of the nature of the voice actor's career is we're just happy to get what we get.
with G.I. Joe, like I said, originally in the first miniseries, Duke is clearly the primary character. Later episodes, Flint kind of becomes more of the primary leader of the group. When you're developing a voice for Flint, how did you make sure he was differentiated from the other characters and the other potential G.I. Joes to make sure that Flint was distinct as his own character?
I think that was done not so much by us, the actors, but by the casting directors. They listened to Michael Bell. Michael Bell has a very different kind of voice from mine. It's not quite as bassy. It's more kind of has more a little more texture. It's a little more of a tenor voice. And so just his playing a naturalistic soldier-like character would automatically, because the quality of his voice and my voice sound different from me. So I think you can really thank the casting people for that.
Mhm.
Um, we created our characters kind of in a vacuum. I mean, my first question was, my dad was in the military, he served in World War II, and I was in the ROTC when I was in college, Reserve Officer Training Corps, and hung around with older soldiers, older lifers who'd been in World War II and Korea and so on. So I had I'd seen war movies and all this and that. So I had kind of a maybe a little cliched, but I had an idea of what this guy should sound like. He's serious. He's a special operator, no nonsense. Um, and what you're saying about Duke and Flint, I've gotten so many. I hope that Duke and Scarlett are not listening. I've gotten so many comments from fans who've said, whenever Flint and Lady Jaye were on screen, we knew there was going to be action. When Duke and Scarlett were on screen, there's just kind of a lot of conversation. And I thought, well, great. I could, they certainly didn't phase them out. I mean,
Right, right.
Duke had a much more significant role in the movie, the
Yeah.
animated movie G.I. Joe, and he also got killed in the movie. And then fans freaked out when it was screened in the 80s at Comic-Con in San Diego and said, "What are you killing Duke for? The show's only been on for a year. He's our favorite character." So they went back in post-production, changed the dialogue of one of the other characters, said, "Oh my God, Duke's dead," to, "Oh my goodness, Duke's been hurt." So they could bring him back on TV and Hasbro could continue to make money. But so I can thank the writers for making Flint and Lady Jaye a couple that were into the action, more battle oriented,
Hmm.
more mystery, more intrigue, more plot. Why that occurred, I have no idea. It wasn't my doing or any level of talent on my part.
So, because Lady Jaye and Flint had so much more screen time together, and there was very clearly they're building a relationship between these two characters, did the two you and the actress who plays Lady Jaye spend time building that rapport with each other, or did it not change how you approach it, even though you had significantly more screen time with each other than you might have had with other characters?
It pure luck. Mary McDonald Lewis is a brilliant voice actress. She's done all kinds of things and continues to work as a voice actress, doing cartoons and commercials and so on. And is also a dialogue coach. She works for the motion pictures and television as a coach, often for British actors, famous Brits who have to
Hmm.
play an American character in an American TV show or film. Um, so when I ran into her at the GI Joe audition, I mean, she was literally standing in line, a couple of people behind me, and I went, "Mary, how you doing? What's up?" We had met in a voiceover workshop in about 1980 as students,
Hmm.
and became friends and hung out, and had kids together at the same time, and used to go to the fair together and so on. so it's just pure luck that she and I got cast. I don't think the Hasbro people had no idea that we were friends,
Hmm.
but they cast us as Flint and Lady Jaye. And then when we started recording for the 6 episodes of the mini series, the very fact that we as performers knew each other and were happy, delighted, to have the gig. I think that we probably synced up better as
Hmm.
characters than we would have had we not known each other. I mean, you always hear stories, especially about motion pictures. Actors either got along very well and fell in love on set, and oh, what chemistry, or the opposite.
Yeah.
And Brad and Angelina, for instance, I think fell in love on set.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, obviously, this didn't occur here, but in a small way, the same was true. There was a lot of natural, love and chemistry between Bill Ratner and Mary McDonald Lewis, thus Flint and Lady Jaye.
Now, one thing that kind of happened that kind of was kind of interesting. You appear in an episode of the Transformers that overlapped with G.I. Joe. In the series, there's a character called Marissa Fairborn, who's the daughter of someone suspiciously similar to Flint and someone
Yes.
suspiciously similar to Lady Jaye. Now, in your opinion, even though they don't say he's Flint, I think it was, is he Flint? Was that Flint, and is that Lady Jaye, and is that actually their daughter? But in the
Well,
Transformers
here's the PG-13 portion of your show, Jeff. Uh,
verse.
there was a scene that took place between Flint and Lady Jaye on the roof of the GI Joe headquarters, where they're trying to get a suntan, and I think I can't remember what the dialogue was, but Flint says, "I think you need a little sunscreen on your shoulders, there, Lady Jaye." Well, maybe I do, Flint. I suppose you're the one, right? Yeah, baby. I mean, that's how it went, right? And that was it. But it wouldn't surprise me at all. I'd probably have to email some of the writers and ask them if they, in fact, had written a love scene between
Hmm.
Flint and AJ that resulted in the birth of Marissa Fairborn. But that didn't exist. There was never a mention, never a discussion by the writers, or in the session, or in any of the show's 52 episodes that aired of GI Joe, of their having a child.
Hmm.
This was the only allusion to this not certainly not alleged, but this child. And of course, the evil of Cobra had them create. Uh, uh, was the character? Was it Flint or was it Flint's father?
I'm not sure. Not
I
sure.
think it was. I think it was Fairborn, Dashiell Fairborn Senior. I think it was Flint's father,
Oh,
whose
okay.
whose character I played. But it was not Flint's father. It was, in fact, a Cobra who was, a changeling and able to put on the face of Flint's father. But yes, Marissa, blah, blah, blah. You're special. You're doing well, darling. And then he changes into a monster and tries to kidnap her.
So, but in your opinion, though, because there's some contention, because obviously in Transformers they never clarify that it is connected to GI Joe. They just kind of like hint at it, like a little coyly hint at it. In your opinion, that character that you were voicing is connected directly to Flint, and that is those characters, which makes it Lady Jaye and Flint technically then in some sort of
Yes,
alternate world
exactly.
is together.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, I just want to make sure.
I mean, it's just like when you see a Tom Cruise movie and there's some huge gap in the plot, and you're going, I love the picture, but what I don't understand the space monster. Same. I think same thing.
Hmm.
In the Transformers episode, some writer says, "How about we let's how about we have a kid of Flint and Lady Jaye named Marissa Fairborn, and then Flint's father, Dashiell Fairborn Senior, comes along, but it's not really him. It's actually a Cobra in disguise." And somebody on the writing staff, said, "Yeah, go for it."
Now, as the series went on, do you wish they developed the Lady Jaye and Flint relationship further than they did on the show? Do you think there was more area to explore that?
No, because it was fun. Every episode was different. Every plot challenge was different, and like I was talking about earlier, where Wally Burr and Hasbro themselves said we really want to do the next level of naturalistic voice acting. It's not going to be little purple people poo-poos. It's going to be real people doing real things, being in danger, having their lives and at risk, etc. And so every episode was different and it was fun. The only thing I wish is that the Screen Actors Guild hadn't gone on strike at the end of our second season, at which it wasn't the GI Joe team of actors that went on strike. It was the entire Screen Actors Guild, 150,000 members, who said, wait a minute, Warner Brothers, Disney, Hasbro. And there wasn't particularly a beef that we had with Hasbro. It was a beef that a lot of the voice actors working across the street at Hanna-Barbera, etc., were being asked to do 5 and 6 characters in a session. And some of the characters, okay, you got to scream louder, and they'd walk home, with their losing their voices and not be able to work the next day. So during negotiations, these contracts expire every 3 years, and they have negotiations. All right, what's the deal? And the union said, our actors are saying they are only willing to voice 3 different characters in one session, not 5, not 6. And Hasbro and Hanna-Barbera and Disney and Warner Brothers and everybody else said, "Screw you. We can have them do as many characters as we want." And Deke, who was distributing the show, the GI Joe and Transformers, said to both casts, "If you guys go on strike, we're going to move the show to Canada." And we said we can't. There's nothing we can do. It's the broader group of 2,000 voice actors, television and film actors who do voices, who are saying we're not going to do 5 voices in an hour. We're just going to do 3. You can have us do 3, and we'll yell and scream, but we're not going to yell and scream as 5 people because we lose our voices. We can't work. And management, the studios said, "Well, bye-bye." So I believe both GI Joe and Transformers were given to Canadian actors, except for a few of the characters. I think Peter Cullen kept working, for Transformers, and Chris Latta and Arthur Burkhardt kept working for GI Joe, but none of the Joe team. All of us were out of work. That's the only thing that I wish, is that happenstance is I wish we'd had another couple more seasons because it was so darn fun.
Hmm. Now, I'm sure this is a question that's very important that everyone would want to know. Do you actually have a Flint action figure?
Yeah,
You
yeah.
do.
And here's the tragedy. I was so stupid. I had no idea how much money I could have. If I could turn the clock back to 1985, I would go into Toys R Us and spend $3,000 on GI Joe action figures,
Hmm.
and put them in a box, unopened, and unseal them in about 2016, and go to GI Joe Con and go, "Hey guys, like to trade?" Uh, and not only that, I mean, it's silly. I have somewhere. I have a poster, GI Joe poster on my wall, and I have a bottle of Flint shampoo with a Flint, where you unscrew the Flint head from this bottle of cheap shampoo from China. And over the years, people have given me a couple of things, but I've seen, collections. Guys have shown me photographs of their collections, and I've actually been in a couple of fans' houses and their stores with their private collections that are just amazing. Every figure and organized and beautifully shelved and
Hmm.
displayed. There was one guy who came up to me at one of the cons, and he was an older gentleman, about the age I am now. And I said to him, I said, "Sir, you're a little out of the age range for GI Joe here," knowing that the people who were there were anywhere from 22 to maybe 45 at the time, and they'd watched
Hmm.
GI Joe as kids. And he said, "Well," and he pulls a card out of his wallet that he had printed from a photograph. "There's a picture of a prefabricated barn in my house outside Memphis, Tennessee. It is full of nothing but GI Joe action
Nice.
figures, and I spent thousands of dollars. My son's too old for it. He don't give a damn about it. My grandson, He loves G.I. Joe. He's 8 years old. And every time he visits, I take him into that barn I had built specifically for my G.I. Joe, and it'll soon to be his G.I. Joe collection.
Nice, nice.
Yo, Joe, dude.
And that's also of all the characters on GI Joe, and like I said, there's 85 of them. Why do you think Flint became such a favorite character among fans?
I think because of the writers. I can't claim to do anything other than what I was told. I think the writers created a figure, and the same for Lady Jaye, who really got into the action, who they gave a lot of plot to, gave a lot of scenes to, gave a lot of screen time to. And uh, did I win any Emmys for it? I don't think I was submitted. But I can thank the animators and the writers for creating Flint and giving him a lot of screen time.
Mr. Rana, I just want to thank you so much for doing the show for me. Like I said, it was great to reminisce about GI Joe, one of my favorite series growing up, and it was a big deal to talk with you. Thank you so much, sir.
Reversing the Stars, starring Jeff Haas and me, Bill Ratner as Flint. So, Jeff, this has been great fun. You're an expert, man. You know more about this show than I do, and it's so fun for me to answer your questions and go back and reminisce. Literally go back 41 years.
Mm.
Those magical sessions when we created that show. So, thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you for listening to another episode of the Divergent Stars podcast. Please help me battle the algorithms by liking and subscribing. Be sure to turn for the next episode when Dan DiDeo returns to discuss Defenders of the Earth from Mad Cave Studios. The next voyage, travel on.